Good morning, all. We're getting set up, and I'm muting my computer so that we're not listening to things twice. All right, I'll put up some. We have to do the refresh. I thought I did the refresh. I don't have the chair slides.
Okay.
I mean, they're there.
Oh.
If any of the MeetEcho people can kick the tool so that the slides reload, that would be much appreciated. I tried that.
And we need we need to scribe, right?
Oh, yes. Do we have someone who is willing to scribe in the Etherpad for us? Anybody in the room? Scribe, please. Mike, thank you.
Mike.
Everybody is now required to buy Mike St. John's a beer.
Get everybody that out. Okay, we all did that.
Huh. Well, I will share the screen then. Yeah, I know, Paul's slides see. Oh, well, I haven't checked to see if the newest ones are. So let me share screen. Allow to share screen. See what shows up. Share this window. Huh.
That worked.
I like it. All right, are we ready to get going? We're 5 minutes past the hour, or half hour. Welcome to RSWG. We are meant to note well. So even though this is not an IETF activity per se, we do follow IETF guidelines, particularly with regard to IPR policy and other policies that you must take note of before participating in this group. In particular, note that the patent policy applies in this room, that you acknowledge that things are going to be recorded and that you are sharing certain personal information and that you agree to work respectfully with folks. And here is a nice list of different documents that document the policies and procedures that we use here. By this time, everybody in this room should be aware of these. Questions? The agenda we posted earlier, we're going to jump right in. Let me see if I can get the correct slides up. Oh, I have to stop sharing my screen first and then reshare. Which one are we doing first, Paul? As is. I think we've got this right. Let's see if it's going to happen.
John Paul. Tag teaming it.
Okay. You have the floor, gentlemen.
It really does take an IoT guy to know things like switch it on and such like that. So for those of you who aren't following carefully, or actually it looks like I recognize everyone in the room, so you probably are. But so the draft that John had originated that I then joined in on is now a actual working group draft. For those of you who've forgotten, we are in fact a working group, where it's not a working group in the IETF, we're in the editorial stream. So it is draft RSWG, meaning that it's not draft IETF RSWG, it's draft RSWG because there isn't actually a naming style yet for the editorial stream. So we picked this one. We posted the draft a while ago. It's at a 0.1. There's only a few changes. We'll talk about those on the next slide. So we believe that this is extremely close, if not exact, but probably not exact, to what the XML to RFC code is currently doing. That's why this is as implemented. There are some diffs, and those will become probably problematic, but we will keep discussing them. So we think that it is now ready to decide what to do with this document, which Ecker just did 10 minutes ago, if you're reading the mailing list as you're watching the slides. Next slide. I can do these because I actually sort of caused them. So there were, someone noticed that in the 0.0, there were some C-refs being called out. Like if you look at the HTML, that turned out to be a tooling artifact that Julian Reschke fixed for us. There are just some things in the current XML to RFC where if you do something that it doesn't really recognize, it makes it into a block quote or a C-ref or something like that. That got fixed, so nothing that you all would see. But these,
yeah. But the way this document is produced is extremely complicated. It uses, it uses some rather complicated software that only Julian understands. It basically takes the existing draft, compares it to the XML grammar, and then basically updates the document to add boilerplate sections where the grammar, basically to make sure the document matches the grammar. So that's where the C-ref problem came from. And there's also that also explains some of the other kind of warts where, as I was hand editing, I didn't always get them exactly in sync.
Although I think we got them pretty much in sync in the 0.0. So the only differences now is that with the tooling changes, we were able to do it. And one of the tooling changes is the second bullet, which is that we added the XML template for stream. Stream said text goes here, but if you looked at the actual grammar, it said it must be one of these choices. And so that the current draft now says it must be one of these choices. And then the last thing we did was there was a change log at the end of the draft. It wasn't really accurate. It was getting longer and longer all the time. We just nuked it. Next. Okay, so this slide is now out of date by 15 minutes. No, Pete, it's fine. I'm saying I wasn't going to try to read Ecker's message and then stick them into the slide. So at this point, please discuss actually becomes Ecker.
Right. So to summarize, I thought I'd been clear, but obviously I failed. Per discussion on the list, the plan is that we're going to have one unified document for 3.1 and as is with, and gradually we're going to migrate the things that are in as is that we decide not to do into an appendix. And we're going to take, and we're going to take the changes that we like that will come 3.1 and they go in the main text of the document. And so you'll be able to reconstruct from this document both versions of the thing at the same time. And so
Oh, wait. Say that again slowly.
You'll be able to
broke the tooling.
You'll be able to reconstruct from this document.
No, actually, I think the tooling can handle that. If not, I'm sure we can ask Julian to, yeah, basically splitting stuff in the grammar into different parts of the document. I believe that works, but if it doesn't work, we can fix it.
But did you just say you actually will want the eventual document to have two RNCs, one for where we are today and one for where we're going?
That is the working state. We have not, there's been no decision what the final RC application status will be.
Okay, you've broken the tooling, but I believe it's fixable, and we just have to figure out if Julian wants to.
Okay.
If not, we will do some clonage.
Sounds great. But the idea was that the appendix will be incomplete, right? The appendix will just be clauses.
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. What people need to do going forward is file issues against the document, either in ways you think that that something is wrong and should be fixed, or something is incorrect and needs to be repaired. We're going to be using GitHub for this, but as discussed extensively beforehand, all substantive issues have to be discussed in the mailing list. So it would be appreciated if you filed, you can complain by just emailing the mailing list, but it would be appreciated if you filed GitHub issues. Otherwise, won't do it.
If you don't, we will be following the mailing list, looking for a matching GitHub issue, and you're relying on us to actually interpret what you said correctly.
Correct, precisely. And so basically the plan here is just to keep banging through these issues until we have no more issues, and then we'll be done and we'll file for publication. And so, go ahead, Paul.
At that point, are you expecting the main body of the text to be reflecting what we want
Yes.
for the future? So it's no longer as implemented, it's as will be implemented once we install it. So that affects the RPC because they will, I don't know if they're going to look at this as a sort of running task list that might change over time, or if they're going to wait. But at the point, let's say we're all done, it's not as implemented anymore. It's as is going to about to be implemented. So we shouldn't publish at that point until we're pretty.
That sounds reasonable to me. Robert, I think Robert has a view on this.
My hand may or may not show up in the queue. Robert Sparks. I'm struggling. Where in this is documentation of the RFCs we've already published?
As implemented is the stuff, basically, every document we've published is valid under the current as implemented.
But he's asking if we're going to be changing that. Where does, I think you're asking.
Yes.
And I have that very question.
Yeah.
Are we going to document what the grammar that between whatever 8020 or whatever that started this, how are we going to?
So the plan that, and maybe I've screwed this up, but the idea was supposed to be that you could take the main body of the document and apply the appendix, and that was the as implemented, and that the main body itself was the thing we wanted, was the thing we were going forward that had consensus.
Yeah. Now,
It's an issue of that the document will contain as implemented. But the resulting document overall will also be very clear about what is as implemented that we think we want to continue doing going forward, and what is as implemented that was as implemented, but we're just not doing anymore because we think it's a bad idea. So all of these states will be derivable from the document, and making it clear in the document that this is part of what as policy we're going forward with. This is not. That's going to be an important formatting and structure question, but that the document will have all of that information in
Okay,
it.
Yeah, but-
so
yeah, but-
that formatting and structure conversation, I think, is what is starting now.
I agree.
hope
I
so.
think we had an idea that we had sort of settled in on, at least the outline of what that would look like on the list, but we obviously have not conveyed that in a way that everybody is convinced we've got it right. So
well,
we will continue that
yeah.
conversation on the list.
There is a question I've been asking for a year and a half now, which is if the final will the final version be fully backward compatible? And if not, what are we going to do about it? And the two choices are either do a one-time fix to the XML, which is my preferred thing, or else basically say there's a flag day and we have old XML and new XML. But we have to do one. If we don't make everything fully backward compatible, which I think we probably won't, we got to do one of those.
Martin.
Yeah, we can burn that particular bridge when we get there. And I suspect we're going to get there relatively quickly. So everyone keep that,
Well,
that
we'll get
question
there
in mind.
quickly when John and I do, like, we will do a trivial -02 with something in it to look like what we think will happen, and then people will actually see the format. Actually, the chairs will see the format because they're the ones who are sort of like seeing and stuff. So I suspect we're going to have to do a few rounds.
Yeah, go on, Robert. Yeah, if you want to. I had a separate point to make, so go ahead. All right.
John's abandoned me, so that's cool.
I was just going to ask a very sort of pragmatic question.
Yep.
Are you setting up?
Oh, right.
Oh yeah, Robert Sparks. No, Martin Thompson. Are you going to set up CI for the draft? So that when
we're
people
not
can make
going to. Would you
contributions-
like to help us?
I can certainly try.
Yeah, I suspect it won't work. That is that if you look in the make file, which I believe is in the repo, you will find a lot of strange and wonderful things.
Well, the reason I say that is if Julian's built this Byzantine system that is completely inscrutable and won't
It's
run on anyone
partially
else's machine,
scrutable.
then
Robert is waving at you about
Yeah.
this.
yeah, exactly.
So wait.
Inscrutable is the default.
So
case.
it is documented, however. I can put in a thing that says if you have a bare Ubuntu or Debian VM, here are the steps you need to do in order to make.
Yeah, that's why I want to do it.
I would like to volunteer to work and to get other people to work to un-Byzantine that make system and make it GitHub friendly as part of getting this thing into a working group repo.
Great.
So GitHub Actions can work on it well.
Okay. I know nothing of GitHub Actions, so I'm fine with that. And again, it takes a couple of extra things that are a bit magic, but we know what they are.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the reason I say that is I think that people being able to contribute to the draft is going to be important.
Oh,
Because
of
part
course. I mean, they can contribute. The question is then, can they then run make locally and see if their contribution came out correctly?
That's why I want CI. So at least you have a backstop on that sort of thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's all. That's even more magic to me. And if I hear a couple of volunteers, that's great.
Would you go to the mic, John?
Yeah.
Yeah, John Levine. It's one of the things I've been trying to avoid doing, but if
Yeah.
it's unavoidable, perhaps we
And
can.
I have avoided doing. So yeah. Okay. So
Yeah.
yeah. So
I mean,
so
and
we
I-
will unavoid and we will make it possible for the people who know how to do this to help or to give up.
Yeah,
But
and I think that we can re-implement the useful parts with somewhat less complication than we have now, just because we're not making big.
I already did a round of that with Julian about 4 or 5 years ago. So I believe we are at the simplest that we need, but that doesn't mean it can't be done on GitHub.
Okay.
So the question is, once we say this is how we're doing it off GitHub, can the GitHub smart people do it on GitHub? We'll see.
Jay Daly, I'd like to go back to Eka's plan, if that's okay. The first bit about getting consensus on whether we keep some of the changes since RFC 7 whatever, I think could take quite some time, because some of those things in there, from my understanding of them, have got some real depth about discussions, and that would therefore mean that the appendix, and the whole thing is going to take some time to produce. Now, I don't object to that. I just think we ought to be clear that we're possibly setting ourselves up for a one, maybe longer year, process until we get to that. That's all.
That was my expectation. I think we heard a lot of sentiment on the list that people did not want to publish an RFC just of the current as implemented until there was also a consensus document. And so the idea was to have these be fate shared and delivered at the same time while still continuing to have sound documentation of the current state of play. So this was intended to split that difference.
Okay.
So Jay, if your concern was that we would be breaking the ability for someone to look at the current draft and know what the RPC is doing now, we won't do that. We will make sure that the current draft, and somebody is just saying, where's the grammar currently being used, is doable right then for however long it takes.
Jay Daly again. No, I'm not too worried about that, provided that we can keep the authors .ietf.org site up to date, because that to me should be the primary place that people do as the reference rather than this draft, because this is slightly esoteric, draft in order place for people to find it. But no, if we accept the timetable, I have no problem with that. I just want to make sure we're all clear about it. Thanks.
Carsten Bormann. I apologize for not having followed the discussion here. What is this thing documenting? RFC XML, the publishing format, or RFC XML, the authoring format?
Publishing format.
Thank you.
So, and to follow up on that, you don't have to stand for this, but I had some really interesting discussions yesterday with the RPC about the whole thing of for author, what authors are expected to do and such. And my view is we've totally lost the discussion with the authors. Saying to the authors, you must do this before it has turned in is lovely, but it's not what's really happening. And the RPC takes whatever the draft they get and makes it correct for how it comes out. So we can do more with saying to authors, if you do it like this, you're going to see the fewest XML related surprises during Auth 48. But saying authors must has not worked real well so far. Especially because they don't have to do anything in XML. They can still turn in the plain text and make, or whatever. And so the focus now is, what is the publishing format? And then we can later go back to, what do we want to try to convince people to do? Because really the only thing we're trying to do is prevent surprises. We're not trying to restrict them.
Someone put Carsten in queue again.
Yeah.
While he's getting up there, I think Jay's wonderfully naive and optimistic expectations about timescales are cute. One of the things I think we probably need to think about here is how we manage the difference between what we've documented and agreed in this group and what has been implemented in XML to RFC. I know Kasara's been
at that moment.
At that specific point in time, because I know that the changes there have been excellent and they've been keeping up very, very well. But at some point, we're going to ask for something that's difficult. And
yes.
Authors will need to know
that's
that
on the next slide.
XML to RFC is at this particular revision of the draft or something like that. And we have some sort of clear way of managing that one.
And to me, the answer to that is that the timing of when do the tools change comes from the RPC. It is announced fairly well, and then that announcement somehow gets, especially if it happens multiple times, gets wound into the draft so that somebody who's following by dates. I think it's going to get really complicated, or they're just going to say, we aren't doing anything until you're done, and then we're doing it all at once. But that's not
going to work.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, then we will have.
We're going to need to track. We're going to need to track what's happening here at some pace with the development. Otherwise, it's going to be like this epic event at the end of the process. You know, Robert says waterfall is bad, and I agree.
I agree waterfall is bad, but I don't believe that tracking will be sensible to a reader unless we figure out a way to make it sensible. It might be that we have a couple drafts going, no, you described these date things wrong, try again. And we're okay with that. I don't mind if this is a -30 by the time it's finished.
I think it probably will be, but that, the point that John made earlier, I think, is critical here. At the point that we make a decision that has compatibility implications, we're going to have a long discussion about what it means for the current operation of the tooling. And that'll be part of the discussion we need to have there. Part of that discussion needs to be, do we make a snapshot of the draft now so that XML to RFC can peg to that one for some period of time while we work out the kinks?
Sure.
Right? Those sorts of things will have to be part of that discussion. And I just think that that's normal, like engineering. Like we did this with protocols. We know how to do this.
Right.
So let's not get too caught up in it.
Just a chair interrupt to get my head around what the issue here is. If there is a change that we undertake here,
Yes.
that we say this needs to change the tool in effect, that's not going to be in the section of the document that says implemented because it's not yet as implemented, right?
Right. So there's going to be effectively, well,
there's going to have to
do a
be
number of
a
things.
state in the document of, we expect this to be implemented real soon now. And then I take it there will be some discussion between the tools folks in this group
I don't think
about
we
when
need to
that's
capture
going to
that
happen.
state. I don't think we need to capture that state.
Oh,
I
I
think
do.
we need to maintain the 2 states.
I think we need 3.
Let me
Yeah, sorry.
put my position down. You can
Okay,
put
sorry.
your position down. I think we need to document what we want and what the state was.
Right.
And when those 2 things are incompatible, we need to have some documentation of the differences and whatnot. But what I think we want to do is have XML to RFC very clearly identify what version of the draft it's implementing, and for it to be very clear through authors.ietf.org, all those sorts of things, where things are, so that people aren't confused by, you know, the draft says this, but it doesn't work, and all those sorts of other things that come from that.
Great.
Okay. Robert, since it's on this topic, unless Lars.
So let's all try to make
So-
one go first.
You know, I think that what I'm hearing Martin envisioning is we're going to have the draft saying coming soon, XML RSC 7.59.1, you know, for each of the things where there's a section, and that XML RSC itself will start polluting the output of the XML with a little bit more information about what version it is ran that created that thing.
I'm okay for you guys to colloquy at the mic here and sort this, because I want to get an idea of, you know, that everybody's on the same page with this.
I'm thinking there's more of the model that we've used for protocol development in the past, right? So we have a discussion here, and we agree that draft 04 is going to be implemented in a particular way, and that it would be a good thing for XML to RFC to move to draft 04. And at some point, XML to RFC says, I implement draft 04. That's really the sort of level of coordination. Not a bidirectional communication, just we continue to advance our understanding of consensus forward. we timestamp those things. We stamp a version of it when we think it's ready, and then the implementations catch up a short time afterwards.
So, and I agree with you, except that there is value in capturing the version that ran for the RPC.
Oh, yes, definitely within the documents. Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, good. If the chairs in some way need to coordinate those kinds of occurrences, glad to do so. If that's something that the RPC can just manage on their own, that's fine, but just let us know how you need, what assistance you need in managing that.
Well, but I think more of it's going to be that it needs to be coordinated with the document authors. And so
Absolutely.
before we do a draft, like looking in the repo, look at the draft, like we want everyone to say, when you publish the next draft, it will be correct about all of these states.
Yeah, John.
Just FYI, I mean, if you look in the rendered HTML versions of every RFC, it has a complete list of what software was used to generate it. So it's fine for the HTML, and I think there's something like that in the PDF. There's nothing like that in the text because there's no place to put it.
We
Thank
could do
you.
it in control characters. I'm sorry, never mind.
I think, Lars, you were next in the queue.
Stopped being a queue a long time ago.
Yes,
That's
okay.
fine. Lars, so I think Martin and Robert sort of hashed out most of what's going to say, right? This model that we used in Quick and other working groups, that we're going to stamp a particular version of a draft and implement it, has worked well, and it can work here. The one wrinkle that occurred there, which might also occur here, it turns out that, you know, if Tool starts implementing a particular revision, there might be some things in there that are a heavier lift than others, right? And so you might end up with a situation where you have like, this is 04 except this bit, which we can probably handle informally, right? But it's not quite as clean as
That's why I was arguing for 3 states.
I think that is less clean and also way more complicated. I think this is not going to be sort of the super common occurrence, but it can happen that, you know, when you start coding it, you realize it's actually more work and we can't like ship it on the timeline we thought. But I think we can handle those one-offs. I just want to point out there will be some of those one-offs. And it's probably going to be okay. The other thing that popped into my head before we were talking is that if really, you know, tools and the implementations is what matters here, maybe we need to flip this whole thing around. That, you know, it's really up to what the tools can ship that you can put in the draft, but that would be very unusual for a working group to operate under. And so I think this stamp the drafts thing is probably going to be the middle ground that's going to work best.
Go ahead.
I mean, my thought is to continue with Martin's metaphors. This is a bridge we can burn when we get to it. But if it's convenient for this
waterfall, though.
Yes,
Sorry.
if it's convenient for this group for the tools team to say, can you roll a draft that describes this? I don't think that's a problem. You know, that if the tools drives our draft output to say, we need a draft which describes this is done, this is not yet done, this is not going to be done, I think that's fine. This is not a usual working group to begin with. Karsten.
Carsten Bormann again. Hello?
Yep.
Yeah, you're fine.
Yeah. Just closer. Yep.
Okay. I have a mask, so I can get very close. This time it's not constant woman, it's customer moving. Okay, great. Normally I'm transcribed as constant woman. Paul, in your answer to my question, you had me until you said we want to avoid surprises.
In auth 48.
Yeah, okay. Because except for auth 38, all work in the IETF happens in the authoring format. And we have these sophisticated CI chains to make sure that what's in the draft actually works and are actually parsing examples and correctly generated keys. And you may remember the merge patch disaster where something happened during auth 48 that broke what was in the document. And we didn't find it because we had different tab width settings when looking at the document. Yeah, I think it's important to work on the surprises in other parts of the process as well. And that's why I'm insisting at some point we actually look at the authoring language.
That's fine. What I don't want is a lot of the stuff in 7990, 7991 says authors will do this. I don't, we aren't enforcing it, and therefore I don't think we should. I think what we want to do is to explain to them, if you do this, you're going to get this. But for example, and I'm making this up, but I think this will be an example that the RPC people will say they've seen. Some authors will follow the XML grammar, but in a way that is not going to appear in the final RFC because they did creative things with, you know, indentation and stuff like that legally, but that's not the way it's going to be published. So even though the grammar says that's legitimate, That doesn't mean, I don't want them to be surprised at the end and say, well, just because your input passed the XML tests, the RPC is going to put it out that way. They're only going to touch words. They will be touching some tags as well.
Okay, so my remaining question, and that's probably off topic right now, is when are we going to do that other work?
That's a good question. I would be happy to do that with you, since you touch the author side much more when people start with cram down and then wonder what's coming out. I'd be happy to do it, and that should be a completely separate document. I'd be happy to do that with you, with the RPC folks helping, because they're the ones who see it when it comes in, But yeah, no, I think that's a reasonable thing, and let's just do that. Yeah.
Hey, Paul, I'm getting some comments from some remote people that they can't hear you.
Wow,
still.
that's really interesting. Okay, I felt bad being the only person in the room without a mask on, so thank you.
Yeah.
And it's even one of the IETF masks, so, okay.
I think you just need to get closer to the microphone.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, so I think we've done this, and I think the result is we're gonna find out in the next draft or two how close we are to the model. And I'm volunteering John and I to rev drafts as quickly as needed if we put out a draft that we think was correct and it doesn't actually match the expectations of the group. And it's like, no, we thought there would be an appendix here or whatever. We just do another one. We don't have to like wait long periods of time. I also like the model though of that there are plenty of reviewers in the GitHub repo. So we can say, we think this looks like what the next draft will look like. Please, and there'll be a text output version, whatever there as well. Please check this and let us know. And especially Martin, I'm looking at you, that I would want a visual sanity check on some of that before we put it out. And if we don't get all the reviews and it's taking too much time, we'll put out a draft. Does that sound reasonable to you folks? And we just might end up revving drafts for sort of formatting reasons. Okay.
Great.
Okay, well, then we have the next slide.
Do we?
It's the one I just sent you.
Well, now maybe let's see if I'm going to do a reload and if the magic happens.
Did you accept yeah, you yelled that you accepted.
We've been fighting with this tool, but yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Robert hinted as to how I can fix this problem, and we're going to see if I can now do so.
How come you can hear Pete with a mask on much further from the mic than me? I don't get this.
Yeah.
It's not pointing towards
Yeah, it's
him.
pointing to like here.
And I have an outside voice.
We like your outside voice, Pete.
Thank you.
It is really funny to be standing up here and being the only person in the room without a mask, because I've been one of the people who's masked constantly. I'm one of the 20% in the supermarket and such. So. Oh, okay.
It's this. Which one is it going to be?
Yes, that's
It's
true.
probably going to be
It's
that
not that
one.
Pete has an outside voice. He actually just doesn't dance as much as I do.
The ones that are deleted don't say deleted. If you just scroll down the very end, see what we got. There we go.
There we go. Okay.
Thank you.
So
Robert.
John,
That's-
you get to come back. So this is a non-exhaustive list of the current proposed changes that we know of. And I say it's not exhaustive because there are probably some other parts that are small and such, but these are the big ones that have appeared either as their own thread on the list or just in mentioning of, well, we need to think about so-and-so. So postal.
Yes, thank you. Actually, I should have added doc name, but anyway, yeah. For the benefit of anybody who hasn't heard about this the last 47 times I mentioned it, the postal element has a very complicated set of sub-elements like address and city and state and stuff, and formatting that depends on a library that was abandoned years ago. And I found it on GitHub, and it's got like 8 years of ignored pull requests. And beyond that, I have never entirely understood what the point of this complicated format was, even though the guy who added it tried to explain it to me. So my proposal has been that we basically back out postal, and there's a separate thing called postal line. So a postal address would simply be a series of postal lines, which with the country at the end, and the way we would fix this in existing RFCs would be to run them all through the library one last time, because by sheer good luck, all the addresses we've used so far happen to work. Turn them into postal lines and then get rid of all the complicated stuff. And the alternative to this is to hope the library doesn't get too much more broken, because at this point, the places that don't work are places like Guadeloupe, but someday we will get an author from a place where the formatting doesn't work, and who knows how we're going to have to work around it.
Martin, did you have something on postal? I will put you in abeyance. Jay?
Jay Daly. Thank you for that, John. I'm just going to explain it a little bit better, if you don't mind. The intent, the view that Henrik had was that the way that a address is structured for each country is very, very country specific. And we had to have the data put into a format which broke it down, and then have this library then reconstructed in the right thing for that country. The view that John has, that I have, that the numbers have, is that the author knows how to do this, and we simply allow the author to do it, and they just put it in postal line, in the structure, the line, however they think is appropriate for their country, and we don't need to double guess the author. And that, to me, is the crux of the issue here. And that's why, I completely agree with John. Going away from this to postal line is the better way to do it, rather than thinking that we need that, tool to do something that the authors can do perfectly well, quite naturally.
Yeah, and just a related comment is the one element I propose to leave is country at the end, because Robert says that we do collect country statistics. I'm pretty sure we do not collect house number statistics, so that element can go.
Exactly, that's right. Thank you.
Karsten was actually in the queue next, but he is deferring to Jean. Jean, go ahead.
Jean Mahoney, some comments on postal and how it's been used in published RFCs. So there is a bug with how the library renders country when it's the Netherlands. And so we've had to be.
We have no one from the Netherlands.
Yeah, so in order for this to work, we've actually had to strip the off the Netherlands. So yes, authors will submit their addresses, the Netherlands. In order for this to work, we've had to strip the out. We've published like that. So changing things to postal line, although we say we'll keep country, I'm just pointing out there's, but that changes content of the RFC.
Well, the goal is that the text won't change, only only the coding will change, if that makes people feel better.
Just very tiny detail. We're keeping country. We're not keeping the library to process country. We will just render whatever bits happen.
It's going to be line country, and it's going to just render that way.
Yes,
Yeah.
but we've, it would have been nice that we could have, it would, sorry, I'm frustrated with this because we did have to change the country name to make it work with the Netherlands. So we don't get that fixed when we make this change. And I guess the other thing is that sometimes ordering is just going to change because the postal elements in that library, you can change the ordering of the elements, the street and the postal codes and what have you. And postal will, that library would have put it in a certain order that it thought it was correct. Anyway, if we were to re-render using postal line, those things would switch.
Well, no,
perhaps.
my proposal is that we run the stuff through the library one last time, so it creates the postal lines for us in the correct order to replace the complicated elements we have now.
Okay.
So the conversion would look at the rendered one in the current RFCs and turn those into
Just-
postal
okay.
lines. Yeah.
Okay. That,
It would, in effect, yeah. Yes, it would, yeah, I'd rerun the renderer to get the same effect, but yeah, okay.
okay.
Because I know you've had other problems like SEDEX, which is a weird weird
Yes.
French thing. Yeah, we had
Yes.
trouble figuring out how to make those render too.
Mhm.
Like it's just it's way more trouble than it's worth.
Okay. I just wanted to, are other people have comments on postal?
I think so.
Okay.
So why don't we do these three one at a time?
So I'm just coming up to speed a little bit. So let me just like ask some dumb questions. So the interior postal line is just free-form text, right?
Yeah.
Good. Okay. So you said a couple of times rerun the library one last time.
Right.
Does that involve, is your proposal does that change the XML, the canonical XML?
Yeah, my proposal is to change the XML but keep the text the same.
I don't object to that. I'm just trying to clarify where we are.
Yeah.
And I see John, why you were making this point earlier that we have to deal with this very, very soon.
Yeah.
The final thing I was going to ask is country a problem for political reasons? And do we want to address that point? And no is a fine answer. I just want to
I
make sure
think
we.
the answer is yes and no.
So far, the answer has been no, in that Paul Hoffman working for ICANN, who has this problem all the fricking time.
Yeah.
I have noticed things in the author blocks in RFCs that would cause day-long meetings at ICANN.
Mhm.
So I believe the answer is no, it's not a problem. We just go ahead and do it.
Right. I mean, so I think
We might create a new problem later, but I have seen things that just go through that seem fine at this point.
It
Right.
is what goes in the country as proposed, the two-letter code.
No, it's a name.
It's a string.
It's a,
Okay.
it's a string, and yeah, currently the string is limited by what that library will accept. The plan is the string is whatever the author says on the assumption that she knows where she lives.
Right. I mean, I think it's fine in the, I don't think, well, I'm sure there are always objections to having, CLAND in the country, in the rendered RFC, but those seem modest. I think my question is it a problem to have CLAND in the country, in a field that says country in the XML? Is that a problem? And if the answer is, and I'm using CLAND deliberately to avoid any of the hot buttons, but if everybody's cool with this, I'm cool with it. I should make sure it got raised.
Yeah, I mean, remember the postal address is completely optional. Some of our authors appear to live only in cyberspace, which seems to be okay. Yeah.
Jean, do you want a quick interrupt?
Yeah, no, just to comment on country names like, say, Sealand. So practically, if an author's address can be used to address an envelope and that envelope gets to that author, it's a legit address. So if you could send a postcard to Sealand, then yeah, the author can use Sealand. I went looking.
Our scribe had an interrupt.
Yeah. So basically, it's the International Postal Union making decisions for us.
Well,
No, it would be the Universal Postal Union, but I think the answer in practice is yes, because they control what international mail is deliverable.
and we actually check country names against an ISO country codes database. So, but to comment on politically sensitive country names, one of my observations, and based on anecdata, is that authors living in those countries tend to just provide email addresses. They don't tend to, just an observation. You don't have a lot of authors asserting, no, I'm, in this country that's not really a country yet.
Actually, I'd like to make an interrupt here. Let's drop this discussion because it has nothing to do with the syntax.
Martin.
Martin Thompson, we're not going to test that this address works.
I just asked, let's go out. Let's
Right.
just drop it.
We're just going to let people put whatever they want in there.
This is a style guide issue, not a format issue.
Right.
It is currently because we don't have a restriction in the syntax saying it has to be to a deliverable country.
But it might, yeah.
But it is a style guide issue, and I want to defer to all style guide
No,
issues
that's a
to the
decision, that's a
RPC.
policy decision that you're proposing we make. And I think it's probably
Yeah,
okay.
I mean, the current, the current code, you know, if you put in your address as 123 Hummingbird Lane, you know, any town, Alabama, I mean, it'll accept that even though the address is nonsense. So it's like, we're not making a semantic change here. We're just stripping down the syntax.
Right. So the reason that I'm saying it's not just a style guide issue is because one resolution would be to change the name of the field to Schmuntry, right?
Wait, I'm sorry, say that.
No, it's,
So I mean, the concern I'm expressing is the IETF asserting the Sealand as a country and putting in a country field. And so one way to fix that would be by changing the name of the field. And so that's why it's not just a style issue.
if I thought somebody cared, I might agree, but yeah.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
if nobody cares, I'm fine.
Right.
happy
Yeah,
to have it
okay.
considered dropped.
But yeah, let's move along.
So regarding running the tool one more time, we don't need to. We've got the output already.
Yep.
Let's
Yeah,
just,
I'm not sure why you want to run it one more. I would mark.
Oh,
it's much easier, much less of a hassle to just go and get the,
well, I mean, I've been thinking about how I would do this. I got to snip out the postal stuff. Basically I have to find the postal stuff so I know what I'm replacing. Yeah. But
or
by the time I do
HTML might
that,
be more accessible.
matching that up with the text output is probably harder than just running the library again. But that's a nit we can
Okay.
worry about later.
Yeah, I think we're going to run into issues with people self-identifying countries, but that I think will be a problem that we can deal with at the sort of
Again, I don't think
stream
we deal
level
with
rather
it.
than doing it
It's-
here.
It's a style guide issue.
So, but your suggestion is pull the current text out of the current text, and
However it's done, it doesn't really matter to me. It's just,
And any rule we set up will be wrong. I mean, for example, you can put Scotland as the country in a deliverable address in the United States and it will work, even though it's not a country, even though it's not in the ISO list or anything else.
right. And I'm sure Aotearoa works just perfectly fine, even though they haven't changed it yet.
Yep.
The question that I have, I think it's a deeper one. John, you're saying this is just a one-off, just this one time. And that
I mean, the change.
changing the
XML.
canonical
Thank you.
XML is not a decision that we should be making lightly. And we should not be just saying, oh, just this one time. We should be making sure that it is a deliberate choice with some sort of principle basis under which we can decide that these sorts of changes are acceptable.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we can talk later, but I've given some thought to this. Also, I mean, like, series info will change it and document. There's a whole bunch
Exactly
of these
right.
things that will have the same thing of changing the XML, and we need to make sure that the re-rendered version is sufficiently similar.
And I think we need to have a discussion about the principles under which we need to be making, we can make these changes if we can make these changes. And I would rather not have us bury that decision underneath some discussion about countries and what they're called.
Yeah, so yeah, Chair interrupt here.
Yep.
I agree. This is something is a topic we have to cover. And I think Alexis actually raised this and emailed us. So we will try to foster discussion on the list about this exact topic of how we manage it. And so maybe we can put a pin in it for now, but the chairs we'll get a conversation going on the list.
So I have a question related exactly to that is, once that decision is made, should the decision and, how we did it appear in this document? Thank you. Okay, Martin is shaking his head no. I think there should be a separate document about changing existing XML, and that should have the rules, and maybe even it could be a running document that says, and we did it on this date for this reason. Oh, and we thought we had them all, but we did it later on this date for this reason. So great. I think we're in agreement on that. Yep.
Ecker just entered that into his tracker. Thank you. Gene, I take it you are in the queue accidentally. Jay.
Jay Daly, I think we should genuinely consider dropping postal addresses entirely. We know that people don't use them, and because they don't use them, the need to make those accurate drops off, the likelihood that people do silly things with them increases. I'm including the country code as well on that. While the country gives us useful statistics, I don't believe that it's the right way for us to attempt to go to have country-based sort of, points almost against this. And we should generally consider losing the post address in it, gone. We are an internet organization, people just deal with it, internet, and this problem then just disappears as a result of that.
Sandy, can I get you to come to the mic on this one?
Either way, Jay, I'd suggest propose that very directly, either as a GitHub issue on the list or both. That would be appreciated.
Oh, my phone's ringing. Just throw it on the floor till it breaks. Sandy, would you consider that proposal to be a style guide issue? Because is there something in the style guide that says, postal addresses will be there? I'm trying to be really careful here.
It's currently optional.
What?
It's optional.
Okay.
Email
And so,
address is
Jay,
required.
you're making them non-optional in the negative. Okay, great. I just wanted to double check that. I'm trying to be really sensitive to us doing something in a format spec that in fact changes the style guide. I want the style guide issues to come from the RPC itself. Yeah, so great. Okay.
Let's talk about you.
Let's talk about me, shall we? Oh, no, I'm sorry. Someone wanted to talk to me on the phone. So the U tag was added to the grammar after 799 was adopted. That's the most polite way I can put that bullet. And it was not used in any published RFCs.
Not true.
I just looked weeks ago.
It is not true.
Wow,
We'll
okay.
show you.
No, I'm
several.
not questioning you. I'm questioning my ability to do regexes. Okay.
You didn't allow enough credit between the
It has attributes.
Okay.
It has attributes, so if you just look for.
So ignore the second bullet, which is easy now since we don't have anything on the screen at the moment.
I lost connectivity.
Yes,
I'm working
okay.
on getting it back.
So it has appeared, and therefore I will change that second bullet to, we need to figure out whether we strip it out of, when we're doing the changing the XMLs and stuff. I suspect it was not implemented, that it was not done consistently.
No, it is.
You're making a foregone conclusion here that I don't understand. You want to take out the U element. Is that what I'm hearing?
That's what.
I think for a while, as you know, to your great pain, the only way to sneak in non-ASCII text was to hide it in a U element.
Yes.
I believe we have changed that, so now you can put non-ASCII text any place it's reasonable, which is
Yes.
something we're going to discuss later. So I think at this point, it actually would make sense to allow the U element to stay in the cases where you're using the characters as an example.
Exactly.
Okay, and the one issue there is, speaking of libraries, that the thing that renders the U element pulls out the character name, but I guess we can assume that the Unicode consortium will be around long enough that list will continue to be available.
No.
Well, there is a minor discussion whether you want to have the original name or the corrected name. That's really something to
Yeah.
take on the list, right?
Yeah, right.
But I think the element has turned out to be useful. It has a very limited area of application, but where you can use it, it actually helps the author. So I wouldn't want to use it from the authoring.
So can you say where you feel that it is useful? I mean, it goes in there, but what is the value?
When you're calling out code points as examples.
What you can do that in running text, and that's
Yes,
what we'll discuss.
And then the author has to make sure that the code points they put in actually are the ones that the text they provide have. So they have to run another line of CI to actually check these things. And
I'm not understanding. I'm sorry, Carson. Can you?
Okay, I put an LF0 in my document. Now, unfortunately, there are two different LF characters. And which of the ones did I actually mean?
Wouldn't you say U plus and then
Yes,
give?
and the U element does that for me.
Oh, it does it for you. You want this to do it for you automatically as compared to
Yes.
you typing it in.
I just want to use the automation that this provides.
Okay, so let's discuss this on list because I think that trusting a tool is less good.
Well, I think we have already found bugs where the actual character in the document is the wrong one, even though the description is correct. Yeah, and the tool should fix that, Mike.
Yeah, just clarification, you're talking about basically glyph when you say different versions of the yellow character, right?
Different code points.
They're actually different code points.
Is the rendering the same?
Yeah, sometimes it's the same, sometimes it's almost the same. Well, I mean,
Let's do
yeah,
this one on the list.
yeah, the simplest example are
Examples on the list.
yeah, the simplest example are the three things that look like the letter O. Yeah.
So let's take this to the list, and I'm sorry I said it was not used. That was absolutely my error, because I searched for it and I failed. Okay. Series info, which is something that I take, unfortunately, some credit for having put in 7990, and it turned out that it's just totally a mess and that we started shoving too much stuff in it. So we need to discuss how we really want all of that information in. And this, again, would probably cause a re-rendering of the XML.
So you're not talking about the series info element per se, which is very useful in references, but you're talking about the attempt to stash some of the metadata for the document itself
Yes.
into series info, and that was misguided, and we should get rid
Yeah.
of it.
Yeah, sorry. So series info at the top of it, not in the references. Yeah. So anyways, again, we're not going to come to any decisions today, but these are things that have come up as stuff that's in the current one that we might want to change, and we can see why.
Martin Thompson, I think there's been some discussion about a number of things that not on this slide.
Sure.
Yeah.
I said that earlier.
Yeah, I was going to do doc name, but go ahead.
I would like to talk about the stuff the prep tool adds, because we've been talking about that at some length.
Oh, yes. Yeah, that's an interesting one. So look, we don't need to do it here. What? Oh. I agree. Let's not do it here.
Okay.
But no, this was just a short list of the ones that, to get things going. And in fact, some of it's wrong. So.
Indeed.
Yep. Okay.
All right. Maybe later.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, is there
what else do
value
we
to
have?
us doing them verbally as compared to seeing examples on the
I
list?
think there's a number of questions of principle that would be really helpful to.
I don't have any concern about using some agenda time.
Oh, no, I
to
wasn't
at
worried
least
about
get the
time. I was
just
worried
get the
about it
discussion
getting
started.
lost. I don't want it to get lost in.
Mike's a
Yeah.
good scribe.
Yeah, thanks.
Series info at the
we're
top.
take-
What we're talking about here is the series info at the top of the RFC has gotten very muddled.
I don't think we
And we're going to
came to a
continue that on the
conclusion,
list.
but-
Yes.
Yes, so series
so
info
we're
was
done with
addressed
this and not-
as going to be discussed on the list.
Mhm.
And-
With specific proposals.
And Martin would now like to bring up a new topic, which is prep tool.
Which is why I waited. Yes.
So actually, we don't have to stand here. Why don't you come up and do that? Because you've got a full-on topic.
You can do it from the floor.
I can do it from.
Go right ahead.
Okay.
This is fine.
Well,
But you're welcome
We're
to
all
sit
friends.
down, gentlemen. Thank you.
So the prep tool does a number of things, and these are wonderful things that it does, but specifying what they do is a burden on us and the tools both, because in the transformation from the authoring format to the publication format, it produces firstly cruft, which is the addition of default values on every element that has a default value, some of which are concretely just noise. So there's some attributes on xref elements that concretely are not used under these circumstances, and it's just a consequence of the way the grammar's written that the tool adds them back in again. That one I think we've gone back and forth on in a number of ways, but I think we came to some reasonable agreement on the list about the expectations with respect to what defaults would be, and I forget the exact way that conclusion was framed, but I think I'll have to find that before I continue. But then there is things like the table of contents. I think that one's a real problem and we shouldn't be adding it, but I think other people disagree. Further, there is things like, I believe certain elements get identifiers attached to them in different ways. Is that true?
You mean ID?
Paragraph numbers and section numbers and all those sorts of other things, which I think concretely may be a useful thing in the sense that we go from the XML format to other formats and we potentially need stable means of identifying those things, you know, in, for instance, the HTML. Robert, I'm going to defer to you on this one now.
So fundamentally, I think a use case that hasn't really been exposed in the conversation, not for lack of trying, is re-rendering what was rendered at the time, right? So I'm going to describe a ludicrous situation that's ludicrous on purpose, so ride along with me on ludicrous. We decide that we don't want in the future to make our sections 1, 2, 3, 4, 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, that we go to 1A lowercase III universally across the series. We want to re-render an old RSC. It's an old RSC. We'd like to re-render the table of contents the same way it was rendered at the time, even though the tool now, if it were go to render it, would make the outline completely different.
Yeah.
That's why those big massive bits are landing out there in the prep tool.
Did you want to argue about that piece? Because I want to.
Yeah, I think that's, yeah, go ahead.
So, I mean, I understand that, but like, that is burdening the present with a giant amount of burden to avoid some hypothetical burden in the future that could be solved by having the tool of a switch. So I do not think that is a good decision.
I was going to agree with Eric there. If you want to make such a change, we may as well regard that sort of thing as a breaking change and treat it accordingly by having an attribute on the RFC that says we're now using the new numbering scheme, and if that attribute is not set, then the present scheme applies. A lot of these things can be dealt with in that way, I think, and that I think goes to a lot of things along the lines that we're talking about here. I do think perhaps that there is value in having anchors generated by the publication process, because the anchors then give you an ability to have an unambiguous, unique identifier for the thing that you're talking about, as opposed to going, well, here's a bit of XPath or something like that. Being able to go hash section 7 with a predefined and clearly understood format is a useful thing. I think we probably need to specify that a little bit more clearly, but that's the only thing that I concretely understand the prep tool to be doing, aside from the X-include stuff, which I think is essential.
Jay, you're in the queue.
Jay Daly, so going back to defaults, I think we need to look at it on an individual basis about the defaults. We all know that I think that section format doesn't need to be filled in default. Someone did a calculation on RFC and it appeared 400 times, for example, in just one. There are one or two defaults I think that actually are meaningful, and I think we agreed on lists that we would try to avoid meaningful defaults, that you would have to specify one way or the other and not have a default around it. One thing that is interesting to note is that our chosen schema language, RelaxNG, doesn't have defaults. Other schema languages do have defaults. And so we can't rely on the schema for telling people what certain types of defaults are about things. So those, you know, I think we need to look at it on an individual basis really to understand that. I agree that we ought to if possible, aim for removing defaults. And I think somebody suggested at some point that we try to find a way of inserting a something like default spacing equals at the top, and then not have to put it in everywhere. The spacing of this is something like, however, so that we could avoid having so much of it, but still encodes and defaults somewhere in the document. So I think that was the summary of our discussion around that, and I think it should be possible to significantly reduce those things.
Robert?
Yeah, a quick follow-up on Martin kind of mentioned in his side X that the prep tool has an X include function. That's an important thing to keep. Yes, good. I think in the near future, that's going to be pushed further towards the authoring side on the tool chain. And it should become something that this group does not need to talk about.
Yeah, and I'll just say that as Jay was talking, I was, as chair, going through my head on what is a policy issue as far as that goes, or just it's an RPC instantiation of how they happen to operate. And I see, Martin, that you're making a good distinction here, but I think we're going to have to write it up very clearly whether what pieces of that prep tool are instantiation versus policy.
Yeah, so I think for us here, if we do not document X include at all, we would achieve the goal that we set out to do, which is to document the publication format. However, there may be some value in having something in an appendix that sort of says, well, here's a bunch of things that you might use, you might do for an authoring process that allows you to use the same format essentially, but throw in X includes and processing instructions of the following form, because they will be interpreted by tools that will help authors generate things that are very close to the final publication format. One of the reasons I think we need to push on, I think, making the publication format a little closer to what people experience from the authoring side is that the Auth48 process is a little challenging in the sense that we often deal with the RPC sending us documents that are essentially in the authoring format still, because of that's how we all like to deal with it, right? We don't want to have all the noise of added defaults and all the other auto-generated identifiers and all of that business. And so the more the publication format resembles what it is that people submitted in the first place, the easier that process is for everyone involved. Because as much as I hate to say it, the XML format is terrible and no one looks at it. And I know some people do, and I went through in detail the difference between what it is that I submitted and what it is that the RPC returned on a number of documents, and it's tedious. It's even more tedious when you have these other layers of things added on top. We need to make sure that every single thing that we're asking people to do there is justified. And I just can't justify most of the stuff the prep tool does. The other thing is, I don't want to have us really bogged down in specifying the details of what is essentially an internal process on the publication end.
Jay?
Jay Daly. I don't think you're entirely correct, Martin. The prep tool is run after the Auth48 process, and so it doesn't interfere or have anything to do with Auth48. It's an entirely separate thing afterwards.
Yeah, this is bad. Yeah, so this is concretely a bad thing, and we've had a number of people complain about this specifically because the thing that you approve is not the thing that's published, and so if the prep tool is making changes that have consequence, maybe because there's a software error or something like that, you approve a document, that's not what ultimately gets published.
Jay Daly again. I think though that we're all agreed that there is one element of the prep tool that cannot be removed, and that is inserting section numbering, because that has to be the final step after the ordering of the sections is finally finalized through whatever editing process.
No, I don't agree with that.
No? Okay.
Section number is entirely derivable from the document structure. So no, I do not agree with that. That's a, it's derivable from the document structure, therefore it's not deep in the document. Yeah, I mean, just the fundamental governance problem here, which is we have asserted that the canonical format, the one that represents whatever canonical means, represents the intention, the official format of this document. This is XML. And yet the authors are asked to approve something which does not reflect the thing that we claim is the final version. And that's not actually an acceptable governance practice. So we have to minimize the gap between those two. Yeah, right.
Paul Hoffman, and just to be clear, looking in the prep tool document, we never meant it to be final tool. It's called prep tool because you could run it at any time. If you run it, you get section numbers, you run it again, it will obliterate and redo. It really was for preparation, not for finalizing.
Yes. So I think we should come back to this question of section numbers, because I think if Jay, as you assert, this is the only thing, having an only thing is much worse than having no things that distinguish the publication format and the thing that someone authors. So though it may require that we back away a little bit from the hypothetical that Robert suggested, I would suggest that because you can derive from the document structure a means of identifying every single element and numbering them or not, it would require that we document a process very precisely for generating those identifiers, and then those identifiers become part of the output formats and not the publication format. I think that's achievable. I think the process that we have right now, it could be simply documented and we'd be done. And then you would have a means of numbering paragraphs, sections, and whatever other things need numbering. And that would be unambiguous, clear, should be relatively simple. And then the output formats would be able to consistently identify the semantic elements as needed, and we wouldn't necessarily have to grapple with this question of having a separation between what is approved and what is published.
Could you repeat that for the mic?
So yeah, so the question is there something particular that happens during this process that I don't like? The table of contents is added, section numbers are added, defaults are added for most of the attributes on elements. I think that's the bulk of the ones, and that just generates vast amounts of noise in the document, and it's unnecessary. I'm going to say it's unnecessary. I know some people are like, oh, I like the table of contents, but I'll give you a piece of software and you can run it.
Yeah, Carsten, well, as we all know, the difference between theory and practice is that there is no difference in theory, but there is in practice. And I think it's really valuable to have whatever bugs the tool had at the time the prep tooling was done are in the published document. You may not be aware of any such bugs, but that may be because you haven't really looked at the exact process that is being used, and in the end it doesn't matter how sections are numbered. It's just important that section numbering stays the same. But I came here for a different point, which is whatever we decide in this room is going to be the authoring language. It's not going to be the language the authors use, because they have CI processes, generate examples, verify examples, compute results, generate crypto stuff and all this stuff. So they are authoring in something different. And there is one state we need to achieve, which is whatever we get at the start of auth 48 can be translated back to the source that the people who are writing the document are actually using. That may be expensive, I mean, work, like a day. But after that, the remaining incremental changes that happen during auth38 are fully automated. So whenever the RPC comes back with another change, the authors can integrate this. Again, this will be a little bit of work, tracing this back to the source, what made the mistake, whatever. But after that, the whole process goes through automatically. So we can make sure that these CI things that happen during document generation actually generate the right thing at the end. And so any idea of authors actually working in XML during auth48, that's a transitory state, that's a bug that we need to fix. Now, I know it's not easy, but I think that's where we need to go.
Robert?
Two slightly related observations continuing the conversation about whether or not the stuff that the prep tool leaves in the publication format is noise or not. I think I will start this by pointing out that the larger community that we have, organizations like Stack Exchange, Wikipedia, large numbers of contributors in those places that don't pay attention to what we're going to be talking about in this room, or really what we are doing is we're developing standards, point into them. And they have a format that they expect to be able to point into them with. And when we change that, it hurts. Moving the tools.ietf.org domain away caused a great amount of consternation at the two organizations that I just mentioned. You know, that great amount of consternation, it turned into, you know, several emails and people got stuff fixed, but work had to be done. Things were broken because we made some changes to domain names. We get into the situation where we start changing how you talk about a paragraph, what the ID that ends up in the HTML. We need to be cognizant that we're going to have this downstream effect on users that are not here to contribute to the discussion about whether or not we should change them. Even if we don't change them, if we don't capture them in the XML, then we put a burden back on the author that wants to use the XML, that may not have to edit the XML in the future. When somebody is using the paragraph numbers that were rendered into the HTML to say, this is where the change was, the author is now going to have to go through a level of indirection through the HTML version to figure out what that text was, to go find it in the XML, to work on it in the XML, instead of just being able to search for the section directly in the XML. So.
Okay. Yeah, I'm glad I got up to that one. So that's a problem that I have today all the time, because as a draft author, I continuously get, oh, in section 4.7, you have the following text and it's wrong. And then I'm like, well, there's no 4.7 anywhere in the source. So that's a problem that we have always. And the idea that you might encode the section numbers in the document would just make that problem worse, because then you put 4.7 on that text and you just added 4.6 previously, and now it's 4.8 and it's gone, it's rotten, right? So there's no good solution to that other than just finding the text. And I've sort of resigned to that as just a consequence of the way that these things work. So I don't think that's a problem. What I'm actually proposing here is that we standardize on the reference format, so that in this document, people who implement are obligated to produce a section reference in a very specific format that people can then rely on because it's in a standard or it's in an RFC. And so I think that does a lot more in terms of offering a service than the current system, which essentially relies on whatever internal processing that XML to RFC does to generate those section references. I think what they do currently can simply be copied and pasted across and turned into normative language in a specification relatively easily because it's a sensible scheme that we have. But what we have right now is not giving the people on Wikipedia the sort of reliability that they should come to expect, and we can do better.
Paul Hoffman, I just want to note that this last whole discussion is actually opening up that what we're talking about is changing the prep tool document. And so that's fine. I just want to make it clear that in fact, we're not talking about just the format output here, the syntax of the current one. We're talking about how prep tool works as well.
Yeah, I actually want to just share interruption here. We're now, I believe, we have 33 minutes to go and we still have one more topic. I'm happy to burn through these issues because these are more important, but I'm wondering if this prep tool question might be better taken to a small design team, and maybe there are other topics Martin would like to complain about that was not the prep tool, and then we can get those on the table and figure a way forward. Yeah, please.
A short response to that, I think a goal should be that we remove the concept of prep tool from what we has published as a standard, that there may be some formatting things like what Martin was talking about that could become a different document. But the modifying prep tool, don't say that, say deprecating prep tool, having the tooling becomes tooling. We talk about formatting here.
Mike St. John's.
Oh, very quickly for me, if I can, Jay Daly, just to correct something I said earlier. The way we use RelaxNG, the compact thing, we use an extension notation extension that does allow defaults to be in place. Sorry, I got that wrong. So we can therefore rely on those. And if we leave a pointer in the RFC to the version of the schema that was used at the time.
Mike, you were in the queue. I'll let you jump up and get in there.
Sorry, I just got distracted.
You're welcome to come back when you retrieve it. Yes? No, Mike just got it. Okay.
Oh, okay.
Oh, geez, thanks.
There you go.
Martin's comment about section numbers and all that is interesting. The problem is that the references are things that people who are reading the documents in their post-rendered state are going to have to be using. So most of the references are a section number and a section header. If you could program the people to give the section header as the reference, you might be fine. Either that or we just take off those numbers because they're just too easy for people to use. I don't know. I don't think that's a good choice. So we've got to come up with something else.
I put myself in the queue here because I'm not sure whether this is a chair thing or a participant thing, but a lot of this discussion seems to me honing in on the definition of the word canonicalness. And I think we're going to have that discussion at some point, and whether what it means to be canonical for the output format, what it means to be canonical for any other number of reasons. But all of this seems to be centering around that. I don't know precisely how to start to have that discussion. I'm fine with it starting from deprecate the prep tool, and then we get to that somehow, but I think we're going to have the discussion at some point. Martin, did you want to put any other big topics on the list here right now, or should we go on to another slide deck?
I'm sure we could talk at length about XREF, but I don't think that's really, I'm not prepared to talk about it. Let's do the other one.
Okay. What else did we, is non-ASCII the last thing on our list? Yep. Okay. I will get that. And of course, I have two versions of that. Let's see which one is which.
There's only one of those. I don't think that.
We'll find out if we've got the wrong one, but go ahead and start with this.
I actually zip through quickly to the last slide.
The last
Go,
slide,
keep going, just keep going.
that's last slide.
Yes, okay, fine. So now go back to the end. You did get the latest one.
Good.
So with, here, I'll try with the mask on and holding it to, no, leave it on. How come everyone else can do it?
Yeah, you can't like,
Technology.
yes, mask off, mic on.
So this might work this time. Okay, so we've had discussion on the list so far. Next slide, just so we can get into it. To be really clear, this is still an individual draft. The working group has not adopted it. If the working group adopts it, I probably will still continue to be editor. But there are plenty of things in here that are open for discussion. And what I don't want to do is have people say, I don't like something in there, therefore it shouldn't be a working group document. It seems like there's a lot of interest in dealing with this topic. We don't have consensus, but it is still an active discussion, and I think it should be an active discussion actually in the working group. So what the document is about is that 7997 is the policies used by the RPC to include non-ASCII characters in RFCs. This BIS document simplifies a bunch of the rules. It was based on, I tried to keep as much of the text there as I could, but now it actually is sounding funny with that. We might just burn some of it. But the idea of this BIS document is, we had said, at the time that we did all of the other format, here's what we're going to allow, and here are the exact rules and such, and we messed up in a bunch of places, and we should get this correct so that an author, when they're writing an internet draft, will have a feeling for whether this non-ASCII character that they want in the draft, to be in the final RFC, will actually make it into the final RFC before it's done. Carson, are you getting up to talk right now? Okay, fine. Okay, great. Next slide. So I've got 4 slides at this point, or 4 slides for in the current draft, what are the proposed changes? Again, this is not a working group document yet, so people might say, don't make that change or make more changes or whatever. This is just where I've got now. The biggest one is that the RFC stream approval bodies and the RPC are the people who decide for this individual RFC which non-ASCII characters can be there. Whereas 7997 said it was the RFC editor, and now that we have 9280, we needed to clarify that. One of the things that came up on the list is, how will the RPC know what to do? And so the draft says that when they have questions, they will ask the stream approving body. Like this draft assumes that there are intelligent humans working at the RPC. And I did push back actually sort of hard on the list on somebody who indicated, they'll never figure out who to ask. That's silly. Next slide. The draft, I'm sorry, 7997 thought it was being definitive about how you mark non-ASCII characters, except it changed the rules in the middle of it. So the current draft says it does not require marking the characters, but it allows it. And one of the things where 7997 got really confusing was there were different rules for non-Latin characters in author names. So got rid of that, like Latin is just as non-ASCII as everything else is. And 7997 said that when you use any non-ASCII character, you should spell out its name. That has turned out to not be very followable, and it doesn't really mean much to anyone who isn't looking at the names if you have the, the U notation. you want to talk to this now, or do you want me
Yes.
to go through and finish the rest of the
Yes,
slides?
I want to
And
talk
Martin,
to.
actually, Martin, did you? Okay,
Okay.
so Martin will defer to
Yeah,
Karsten,
okay.
please.
So why are we doing this?
Why are we changing the rules from 7997?
Why are we even talking about this? So at the time,
Oh, I'm
10
sorry, I
years
thought you
ago-
wanted an answer. Go ahead.
I want to give the answer. So at the time, 10 years ago, we were the parents who had a kid who was going to start using this newfangled thing, bicycle. And we were very, very concerned and said, well, you can only use this bicycle in these and these ways, because we couldn't imagine that the kid would be using the bicycle in a different way. And we now have 10 years of experience, what we would want to do with it. And I think we need to go back to the beginning and ask ourselves, why did we want to put in some rules here in the first place? And the author name thing is a nice example, because the point here was that we are assuming that an RFC reader is able to read Latin characters. So there is no point in transliterating Latin characters in author names. I mean, author names are difficult to pronounce, in particular if they're French or something. But
Or German?
or German or whatever. So that's a completely different motivation for putting on restrictions than the one that shines through most of 7997, which was that something might go wrong in the path from the author to the reader. The reader might not understand the character that was intended by the author and might be writing code in their protocol implementation that now won't work because they didn't interpret the RFC right. Now that's an interesting concern, and I have a lot of sympathy for that. But if I'm writing a document in the IETF about quantum networks, I mean, I really don't care whether people know what the bra and cat notation is and so on. I just assume that, and I'll explain that in the document, but I want to use that notation. And there's no point in having any of this discussion. So I would like us to...
Wait, why is there no point to revising it? This document is about revising 7997.
Yes. What I'm trying to say here is that 7997 catered to exactly one potential disaster scenario that we parents were concerned of. And in reality, there are a lot of disaster scenarios, and some of them are much less of a disaster than we thought they would be. And we really have to go back to the roots and try to find out what damage were we actually trying to prevent. And what triggered me was your comment, we will treat author names like everything else, because that's completely the wrong direction. The right direction is to look at the specific problem we are trying to avoid. And we are not going to get people to correctly pronounce author names. That's not an attainable goal. And apart from that, we are transliterating author names if they are not in the writing system that the main document uses, and which is Latin. So I think we have to do this kind of thinking first before we go back to making rules about this.
Okay, so I guess I have a strong comment, which is you just totally misquoted me. I didn't say author names are going to be treated the same way as everything else in the document.
Good.
Yeah. So I'm still not sure why you're here now, because we're talking about revising this. If you're saying we shouldn't be looking at any of these proposed changes and we should start from scratch, that's just fine. Propose a document that starts from scratch.
And I think actually that is what I'm hearing, is that we shouldn't be looking at this as a revision of the original document. We should start over from base principles and do
Okay,
something
I
very
believe,
different
I don't know
looking.
if you've read the current draft, but I believe the current draft is pretty much like that. Okay, so you haven't read the current draft. Got it. Okay, cool. Thank you.
So Martin Thompson, I believe the current draft, it cleaves far too closely to 7997.
I do too. I do too.
And so I think, to Carsten's point, we've used a number of, we've learned a number of things about how different characters might be used. It might help to sort of sit back and say, if you're describing a code point for the purposes of examples in documents or for the purposes of interoperability in documents, the U element exists, and we should probably encourage people to use that.
It does.
If you're talking about the names of people,
right,
the contact element exists, and you should probably be using that. Those are things I think we could probably agree on. If you're doing math, just do it.
Yep, and it says that as well.
I was getting to that, Robert. If you're doing typography, we need to make a decision. Can we use an M dash? Can we use proper quotes as opposed to the stupid ASCII thing?
Right.
So that opens up a number of
through
questions.
the slides on this though, because I actually cover those.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Let's
okay.
do that.
Okay. Sorry, but there's someone else in the queue now. But
John,
I would love to get through the slides before we have the discussion.
Yeah. Actually, I'm happy to have John talk, but just remember, people, that we haven't adopted this draft. The key question we have to answer is, do we want to work on this?
Right.
Like a BOF, do we want to work on this? Do we think we can work on this? Is this a good starting point? So keep that in mind during this discussion.
Yep.
And because that's the question we're gonna be asking, in 8 or 9 minutes.
Right. So
John, feel free. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, answer is yes, we should work on this. I think we need a clearer start. I think the right question is not to ask where can we allow Unicode. The right question is where do we need to restrict to ASCII. I think that is, I think the question of what can be allowed and not is similar to a lot of other clear, what is clear to the reader, and that the RFC editor is doing all the time.
Okay, thank you. So are we good? Martin, you're still in the queue or not? Okay, great. So, okay,
Go ahead.
good. Well, I need the next slide then.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm being a little bit frustrated because I sort of assumed people would have read the draft. Yeah, I understand.
Seriously?
Well, but this isn't the IETF stream. This is the editorial stream. Editorial makes it. Oh, sorry. Okay. So then the current draft says it suggests that the character should be an NFC. That will be contentious. The second bullet here is hewing towards the requirements in 7997. I'm perfectly willing to nuke those because that was done out of a great deal of concern, which was unprovable at the time. And then the last bullet says I changed it from rules to use of because they aren't consistent rules. Next slide. And then this is sort of trivial. There was all stuff, we will, it was future tense, and now now it's in the past and in the present. So, and then I just greatly rewrite. So again, if we decide we want to deal with the issue, I'm sorry, there's another slide, but if we decide we want to deal with the issues, but we don't want to start with 7997, that'll make things a lot easier. There are certain people on the list who I know who were very invested in 7997, so I wanted to start from there. But the current draft doesn't feel like 7997 at all. Next slide. So I propose we either adopt this as a working group document or something else as a working group document. If we adopt this as a working group document, meaning it's 7997 bis, we should look at each change and make sure there's consensus on it. If we go the other way and just start from scratch, then that's going to be the normal process. And then it goes through, working group and IETF last calls and gets published. So that's it. I am perfectly happy to drop this draft and start afresh. I believe there are people on the list who will scream bloody murder about that. So
That's our problem.
It is. It is. It is. So, so now in whatever time is left, does anyone have any questions on the draft as it stands?
Yeah, go ahead, Martin.
Other Martin.
Okay, my name is Martin Durst, to not be confused with another Martin.
Right. Although you do spell it different ways. You were my first canonical example of why we should have you with an umlaut.
No, but anyway, I wanted to say a few things. The first thing is that I support adoption of this document. The second thing is that one of the reasons for this is that it's probably a good thing to work on to get a feel for what we have to do in the working group and what is the RPC stuff and so on. The second reason is that I was quite surprised when the RSAG, the, what is it, RFC series advisory group, came out with a
board.
Approval board.
Yeah.
board. Board, sorry, it's a B at the end. Okay. Came out with a statement that said whatever RFC 7997 doesn't explicitly forbid is allowed. I was very split into two when I saw that statement, because on the one hand, I'm very much for being rather liberal and using Unicode where it makes sense and so on, and was when that thing was worked on. On the other hand, the way I remember the discussion when that was worked on was that there were a lot of people very much concerned, and it was carefully done so that it was only the things that everybody could kind of agree on. So I'm I think it's good that this is revisited. And then another point is that already the nice typography, what you call a smart quote and so on, and the use of mathematics, which starts with variable names and maybe a greater than equal sign and so on, was mentioned. And I think we should be, in this document, be explicit about both of these issues, or maybe they're split into more than them. And even that being explicit might include saying smart quotes and other fine typography issues are an issue of the style guide. And
Thank you.
the RPC is dealing with that. That's one way to say it. Yeah?
Yep.
But not just leave it open, and then some people say, it allows everything, so I want my smart quotes. And some other people saying, well, no, it's the same for everybody. So make that these issues are explicitly addressed in the document, even if it's deferred, maybe for the moment, maybe for whatever, to somebody else.
Right.
So Martin, a question, because you started with that you were in favor of adopting this document, and I wanted to clarify, are you in favor of adopting this particular document? Or, so for instance, there have been some people who say, let's clear the decks and start over with a different kind of document, but we want a document, just not this format anymore. Or are you ambivalent about that?
Okay, I would personally say, we have this, why don't we take it and take it wherever we go? If somebody else thinks they disagree, they should write their own draft, and then we can still reopen the discussion.
That's helpful, thank you.
Okay.
John Levine, you were up next.
I'm John Levine. I think we should adopt it, although I think it also needs a lot of work. And one thing I think is underappreciated is the extent to which every time you add basically every time you add a character from a new block, stuff breaks. You know, and it's a fine example. If you simply look at the PDF versions of your draft, they're missing lots of characters that don't happen to be, that aren't, because whatever tooling renders stuff in the data tracker doesn't render like the Cherokee characters in your example.
Well, or
So-
even the yen character.
Yeah.
No, it got the yen character, didn't get the euro.
Yeah, well,
character.
like the PDF in the meeting materials is broken, but the PDF in the data tracker is differently broken.
Yep.
Yeah. So I think that in principle, I agree with the idea that the RPC has the latitude to say, here's what we're going to accept. But I think it would probably be a good idea to have a process for every time they accept something new to make sure, to make sure that it will actually show up in the documents when they're published, so we don't have to go back and reissue them and fix bugs.
Yep. I think that would be excellent.
Jay, you're up to bat.
Thank you, Jay Daly. So, Paul, just to check, you would be happy with Martin's suggestion of extending the document to deal with typographic stuff and to deal with maths, yeah?
So no, I'm sorry, two things. Typographic, no, because I think that that's part of the style guide. Maths,
But
yes.
would you be willing to extend the document to say that?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. No, I think a document, an RFC that says, here are a bunch of things that people might think are equivalent, but they're not. This one's a style guide. This one is a general, stuff like that. I think that would be excellent.
Great. And something similar about math symbols too.
Yeah, exactly right.
Lovely. Thank you.
Well, and the ket symbol, quite frankly. I've been waiting on that document for a while, which is not a math symbol. I mean, quite frankly, it's a physics symbol.
Right. Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
Carsten Bormann, I came up here to say that the question of standard typography is a style guide question, which for me as an author is kind of, I mean, who do I have to talk to get this fixed?
Mm-hmm.
And I would expect that in the end, RSWG is also helping getting things like that fixed.
Could be the RPC, but that is a policy question that the RPC, that the RSWG, I think, can answer.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think at some point I want to stop being insulted by my own documents, and that's why I'm pretty active on this particular issue.
Right. Okay. But I don't know whether that policy should be in here. This document is going to tickle that policy more than anything else. But I think we could have a policy document also saying, style guide comes from the RPC. Here are the things that aren't currently in it that might be, and such like that. So, okay. Great.
Yes, I very much understand that Carsten is kind of concerned about good typography, and I know many people who really want that. Maybe not too many here in our circles. The problem is just that when you go to a publisher to publish your books, it's the publisher who decides how the quotes will look and so on. And so we can either say the RPC can decide, or we can say we'll do that in a separate document because that will maybe take more time. And we'll also have to talk to the RPC. I talked to them a day or two ago, and they were not too enthusiastic about that. But I mean, that's a separate
We don't
issue.
expect enthusiasm on any of this.
But yes, so okay.
All right, great. And by the way, just to make this even uglier, when people are starting to talk about good typography and such like that, many publishers will take the first letter of the first word in a new chapter or in a new section and make it a larger font. We don't want that. So, Jean?
Yeah, just to follow up on the discussion on style guides and the choice of smart quotes or not. So right now, our style guide says ASCII equivalents for punctuation marks.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we currently have. And we are happy to hear feedback on whether this should change, but this will impact our tooling because, gee, XML has a whole bunch of quotes in it, and our tool will have to be clever about ensuring that quotes within T's are, perhaps smart quotes and not mess with or what have you. But I just want to say that, we're happy to get feedback on our style guide. But yeah, we're not ready yet to change this aspect because we'll have to look at tools.
Right. And there'll be multiple tools. It's not just the tools for the output. It's tools for on input as well. That where you're saying, oh no, we're not going to allow that thing in for that reason. That's another tooling that would need to be updated. Yeah.
So just one quick clarification. I was not talking about good typography, things like kerning and ligatures and all this stuff.
Yep.
I was talking about standard typography. I just don't want our documents to look substandard. That's all.
Right. And yet substandard is sort of the standard for some organizations and such like that, and not for others. Yep. Thank you.
Sorry, turn on my microphone. Here's the hand raising exercise I want to do. And I'd ask people who are remote to please type your choice into, I'm not going to use the hand tool because it only has the yes, no feature. Basically, what I want to understand is choice one, I would like to adopt this document, as in the document Paul has published. Choice two is I would like to adopt a document on this topic, just not this one. I want a whole new thing. And you may choose to raise your hand both times if you are ambivalent about that. And choice three is I don't care. I simply do not have a desire one way or the other on that. If there are more choices, you can bring them up to the microphone after our little hand raising exercise. So if people who would like to adopt Paul's document as the document, please raise your hand. All right, so a good 2/3 of the room had their hand up, and I will look to the chat in a bit. For people who would like to adopt a document, not Paul's document, a new document, please raise your hand. And so we have a couple of hands up, including those of some, one joker who actually might have a pen in his hand. Don't care either way. A hand, and again, I'll check the online people. Do people have opinions that are not one of those three that want to mention them at the mic? That's helpful information. Thank you. And we'll obviously put a call out on the list about this. And let's see and nothing in the room exciting looking.
Oh, yeah.
Good. Any other business that we need to attend to in the next 36 seconds? Excellent. This has been quite helpful. Thank you. And we will get this summarized. Thank you, Mike, for using your fingers for good. And we will continue the discussion on the list. Lars, did you have an interrupt?
I don't have an interrupt. I just want to sort of speak for a moment from the RSAP, right, which is not meeting this week because we didn't get anything from the working group. And so we decided let's not meet if there's nothing to meet about. And I think speaking personally without having checked with the other RSAP members, I think that is sort of the way we will go forward, right, is we don't need the RSAP to meet and sit around and eat food without there anything being to discuss. And the stuff that we should be discussing will come from this working group. So whenever you guys send something our way, we will have a meeting and it'll be open and all of that. But don't be worried because you didn't see an RSAP meeting and you might not see one for a while. We'll basically just reacting to what's happening here. That's the setup, right? Thanks.
So Paul Hoffman, I want to possibly disagree with what you just said, because one of the things in this document that was objected to by some people on the mailing list was that the streams actually get to choose by stream which characters they're allowing and such. So even before this document gets sent to you, there may be reason for you to discuss the current state of the document.
Correct. So it would be, I guess, helpful if the group could indicate strongly that it wants the RCEP to discuss this. On that particular topic, I think you could make an argument either way, right? If there's a strong reason why different streams need differences here, that can certainly be discussed. I'm initially now unconvinced that I can see a strong argument for why that would be necessary, especially if the default is very lenient to what it allows. But yes, we could discuss it. Yeah.
Thank you.
And thank you, John and Paul, for being willing to serve here. So far. I didn't see you trying to get out of it.
All right. See you on the list. Madame.